Thank you, Mr. Vice President, Excellencies, colleagues. It is a pleasure to introduce 9 written reports of the Secretary General and the High Commissioner for Human Rights on a range of thematic issues to be considered under item 2, 3, and 9. Let me start by presenting the annual thematic study on the rights of persons with disabilities. This year, on good practices of support systems for enabling community inclusion of persons with disabilities. This report informed the annual interactive debate on the rights of persons with disabilities. It expands on previous reports mandated by the Council in Resolution 49/12. The report identifies measures states and other actors can take to move towards gender, age, and disability responsive support and care systems, both in developing and developed countries. The report puts an emphasis on the examples of promising practices that have been taken to enable persons with disabilities to live independently in their communities. One concrete measure the report recommends to states is to develop coordination mechanisms within governments to establish effective and efficient governance structures supporting care and support systems. The report also finds that success hinges on ensuring that key policy areas are effectively embedded in care and support economy efforts. Such key areas include cash transfers to cover disability-related extra costs, support services, assistive and new technologies, transport, housing, legal capacity, and deinstitutionalization. The report also reaffirms the importance of working together with persons with disabilities and their representative organizations in all decision-making processes in relation to support and care. Next, I would also like to draw your attention to the annual report of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on national, ethnic, religious, and linguistic minorities. It underscores that despite considerable efforts to meet the goal of the full enjoyment of minority rights, serious challenges remain. Minorities continue to face multiple aggravated and intersecting forms of discrimination with negative impacts on the enjoyment of their rights. Against this backdrop, the report calls for concerted action to address the implementation of the Declaration on the Rights of Persons Belonging to National or Ethnic, Religious, or Linguistic Minorities. The report identifies measures that states and other actors can take to secure the full enjoyment of minority rights. It, for instance, notes that the adoption of comprehensive anti-discriminatory laws and policy frameworks is one of the best approaches to address inequality, which disproportionately impacts those in situations of vulnerability. The report also recognizes that advancing minority rights requires an evidence-based policy and actions in fields ranging from conflict prevention to development. A more comprehensive and systemic mapping of different and intersecting dimensions of discrimination and exclusion, as well as human rights compliant collection of disaggregated data, are also critical. The report further emphasizes the importance of a sustained effort to protect and increase the meaningful participation of marginalized groups, including minorities. Let me now turn to the comprehensive follow-up report of the High Commissioner on combating intolerance, negative stereotyping, and stigmatization of and discrimination, incitement to violence, and violence against persons based on religion or belief. This report falls under item 9. It highlights that the peaceful dialogue and coexistence are increasingly hindered around the globe, and religious differences have been weaponized and manipulated for political gain, feeding off the dangerous claim that one group is superior to another. The report outlines measures that should be taken to address discrimination against religious or belief minorities. For example, in the job or housing markets, within criminal justice systems, and in national security responses. States should effectively counter religious profiling, act expeditiously on hate crimes, and protect religious and belief minorities. States must also uphold their international obligations to enact and enforce comprehensive anti-discrimination laws. Education initiatives, positive speech campaigns, research to understand and address root causes, and efforts to promote inclusion and equal rights all play important roles. Peer-to-peer learning and awareness raising may promote respect and understanding between individuals and communities across religions and beliefs, and upholding the dignity of all. States and other stakeholders should redouble their efforts to implement the action plan referred to in Human Rights Council Resolution 52/38, including through the Istanbul process and strategic engagement with faith-based actors. Further progress in implementing each part of the action plan will require the consistent involvement of states, national human rights institutions, United Nations entities, independent experts, and members of civil society, including faith-based actors. Next, I would like to introduce the comprehensive report in follow-up to the high-level panel on human rights mainstreaming held in 2020 with specific recommendations on how to strengthen a child rights-based approach in the work of the United Nations. The report sets out how child rights are integrated in the delivery of the High Commissioner's mandate to mainstream and coordinate a human rights-based approach in the UN system. This year's report focuses on promising practices of child rights mainstreaming in OHCHR and the UN human rights mechanisms, and as well as the investigative and accountability mechanisms. It puts forward proposals how such an approach could be enhanced as a first step to further strengthen the integration of child rights perspective across the UN system. The report draws upon the Secretary General's guidance note on child rights mainstreaming, whose implementation OHCHR is leading in coordination with UNICEF. I would now like to move to two reports related to our work on torture. First, I would like to present the report of the Secretary General on the United Nations Voluntary Fund for Victims of Torture, which describes the activities of the fund for 2023. The report describes how torture continues to shatter the lives of people across the globe. The report provides examples of how, through 199 emergency grants in 93 countries, the fund ensured that over 59,000 survivors have recovered their health, seen their dignity restored, and obtained justice. It also outlines how the families of victims of torture have been sustained through the support provided by the fund. A shrinking civic space and the surge in reprisals is making it increasingly difficult for the fund to deliver on its mandate. Today, staff of many civil society organizations, which the fund is partnering with, are putting their lives at risk to deliver medical, psychological, social, legal, and humanitarian assistance. Due to their extraordinary commitment, critical aid nevertheless reaches the victims. Despite the generous support of over $10.5 million from 22 member states, a large funding gap remains. The report highlights the urgent need to increase the fund's resources. Due to the existing funding gap, the fund has to turn down worthy requests, leaving thousands of victims unattended. There is a possibility to learn directly from the project's beneficiaries and practitioners on how the fund enables survivors to rebuild their lives during a side event to be held on 20 March at 2 o'clock in room 7. I would like to now turn to a second report related to our work on torture, the report of the Secretary General on the United Nations Special Fund established by the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment or punishment. The work of this fund focuses on the prevention of torture rather than the work with the victims of torture. During the 2023 grant cycle, the fund awarded 14 grants for projects in 12 states, all parties to OPCAT: Brazil, Burkina Faso, Chile, Gabon, Honduras, Mauritania, Mexico, Togo, Tunisia, Turkey, Ukraine, and Uruguay, amounting to US $385,000. These projects are implementing recommendations made by the Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture, focusing on the establishment of or strengthening of national preventative mechanisms. Effective and independent national preventative mechanisms have frequently proven to significantly reduce the incidence and the number of victims of torture. The contributions to the OPCAT Special Fund made in 2023 are very far from commensurate with the request for support that is growing from a number of eligible countries and national prevention mechanisms. The report therefore urges further contributions to support torture prevention. A side event on the OPCAT Special Fund will be held on the 27th of March at 1 o'clock in room 25. This will provide an opportunity to learn more about the work of the fund and good practices, challenges, and lessons to be learned in torture prevention. I would now like to present the report of the Secretary General on measures taken to implement Human Rights Council Resolution 9/8 and obstacles to its implementation, including recommendations for further improving the effectiveness of harmonizing and reforming the treaty bodies system. This report falls under item 2. The report highlights the launching of an online complaint submission portal in 2023 to facilitate the submission and processing of individual communications to the human rights treaty bodies for the benefit of all stakeholders. This initiative forms part of a broader digitalization project for the treaty bodies. It has been the practice. The report refers to the latest report of the Secretary General on the status of human rights treaty bodies. The latter was submitted to the General Assembly at its 77th session in August 2022, as requested by the Assembly in its Resolution 75/174. Pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 77/210, OHCHR is currently in the process of preparing the next biennial report to be submitted to the Assembly at its 79th session in 2024. In closing, I would like to draw your attention to 2 notes by the Secretariat. The first note transmits the report of the Secretary General on terrorism and human rights. The report of the Secretary General provides information on the implementation of General Assembly Resolution 76/169 and covers the period from July 2021 to June 2023. It highlights persistent concerns relating to national counterterrorism legislation, due process, and fair trial in terrorism-related legal proceedings, and the question of death penalty, as well as the impact of counterterrorism action on civic space. The report focuses on two areas in more detail, given their prominence in recent years. First, the use of new technology in counterterrorism, and second, the situation of third country nationals with suspected ties to designated terrorist groups. The second note transmits the report of the Secretary General on the safety of journalists and media workers, with a special focus on the safety of women journalists, online and offline inclusion. The report describes the current situation in relation to the safety of journalists and media workers worldwide. It highlights the persistent killing of journalists, as well as increased physical violence, intimidation, legal harassment, and the use of surveillance techniques against them. The report also focuses on the safety of women journalists, highlighting, among other issues, that women journalists are disproportionately affected by online violence and disinformation. The report further provides an overview of the activities of the United Nations Interagency Network of Focal Points on the safety of journalists. The report notes that recommendations from previous reports of the Secretary General on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity remain valid, and urges states to take action on previous recommendations and new ones set out in the report to improve the safety of journalists, including women journalists. I thank you for your attention.